Hi everyone, welcome to the CZ Armorer channel. What I'm going to do here today is something people have been asking on the comments of the other videos. So this is a CZ Shadow 2 Optics Ready, basically stock, nothing really changed on it. It has gone through a few rounds, and I'm going to do a full trigger job on it, which includes some polishing on it. So this is going to be about polishing. So people have been asking, oh, can you put a video together on what parts I should polish, how I should polish, what I should polish or not, etc, etc. So I'm going to share a little bit of that experience with you guys here as I go through the process with this gun. So if this is something you're interested on, stay tuned. Alright, so first thing we're going to do here is set some expectations about what this is about and what this is not about. So polishing is not going to really give you, well, particularly in this model, it's not going to give you much of a lighter trigger. If you're looking for reducing trigger weight, polishing has some part on it, plays some role in it, but really minimal. Like trigger weight is going to be more about springs and, you know, geometry of sear and hammer or your trigger shoe itself. It's going to be on those areas. On a Shadow 2 in particular, being a double action gun, it's going to be your mainspring that's going to give you the main difference in trigger weight. Polishing is more about smoothness. It's more about making the trigger smooth, especially in double action. Right now, with the OEM, and the gun is unloaded, there's nothing there, nothing on the mag well here. So as I pull the trigger here, I can feel there's some drag in it. Both ways, right? When I'm pulling the trigger and when I'm letting the trigger return, I can feel some drag. Something is dragging here inside, and that's what that polishing is going to be able to address. It's going to make this very smooth, a little bit lighter because there's less friction, but you know, if this is a OEM out of the box, let's say 7-8 pounds trigger, it's not going to go to 5 pounds just because you're doing, just because of polishing, right? You're going to need to play with springs and other things to really get some trigger weight difference there. So if anything, you're gonna maybe got a couple ounces, if even that, just by polishing. But the experience on the trigger, the feel on the trigger is going to be much better when you address all this friction that unfortunately, you know, I can feel it here. I can't translate that to the video, but you have to trust me, there is a lot of friction here on both ways, and the trigger goes in and comes back. And in double action, there is some as well, some friction here, you know, in this take cup, and when the trigger resets too, you know, after the trigger is all backed up, all the way when it comes back to reset, maybe you can see that it doesn't go back like uniformly. It goes kind of a, you know, it's like there's something hanging on it, and maybe it goes like in little stages forward, right? As opposed to go, you know, smoothness is one thing just sliding through it. So this is what we're going to be addressing: the smoothness, the trigger feel, more than anything else. All right, so let's get going. Let's get the slide out, and we're going to look into the areas that I believe that friction is coming from, and whether or not we should polish those areas. So if you look at CZ Shadow 2, the frame without the slide, you're going to see, let me get something here to help you identify these areas. You have the trigger bar here in each side of the frame. You have these bumps in the trigger bar up here. Then the trigger bar dives underneath the sear cage or ejector, and then it gets in contact with the sear. Sear's right here, which is holding the hammer cocked. So when you're pulling the trigger, say, uncock the hammer, pull the trigger in single, in double, which I have to be careful not to drop the hammer here, but as this is going back, so that movement that you see there is where the friction would be. So this could be the friction areas. What we're going to be looking for here is friction between the trigger bar and the frame itself on both sides. There might be some friction between underneath this area here. I'm going to take the ejector off so you guys can see, but there's a disconnector. It could have some friction. The disconnector could have some friction in two different areas. The bottom of the disconnector can be dragging underneath on the frame underneath the sear cage. the top of the disconnector will be dragging on the bottom of the sear cage here. What else is more friction that we need to look at? There is a trigger bar spring that rides underneath this bar that is going to be also producing a lot of friction with the trigger bar itself. That's actually one of the main areas that you can gain, you can produce some significant benefits on polishing or tuning, is the trigger bar spring, the contact between the trigger bar spring and the trigger bar. Being careful that if you take too much tension out of it, too much pressure out of it, then the trigger bar won't reset anymore. But it's just one area for you to look at. And then you also have on top of all this your hammer strut here that could, at the bottom of it particularly, it could be dragging on the mainspring, so you need to look into it as well. So let's start taking this apart and taking a look at individual parts. Okay, I took everything apart, just removed the last part here, the trigger bar, and this is like, there's nothing here inside anymore, or nothing relevant at least. Oh, except for this is the trigger bar spring that I mentioned about. It's kind of a wishbone spring you can see here on each side, right there. There's one side here, and the other side of the frame there. This is what I was talking about. It rides underneath the trigger bar right here, in this little rails that you see here on its side, and that's where there's a lot of friction here. Actually, this is kind of a rough initially, so polishing this is gonna definitely give us some benefit. And the tuning of this spring goes just by bending the springs up and down to kind of find what's the ideal tension that you have there that keeps the reset working reliably but takes a little bit of the friction off, and this flat screw right here. So how do we look at this? What should we polish? What we shouldn't polish, etc., etc. So there's nothing to do on the trigger shoe. So I'm going to take that off the picture here. Really no friction here whatsoever. So if there is, it's going to be something not normal, and not in this gun. This gun has no friction in the trigger shoe. It's really trigger bar, maybe trigger bar, and the other components that I mentioned. So how do you find out whether or not part of that friction was there? Well, this, like I said, it's a gun that has been through a few rounds. So what you're looking for here is if it is a gun that has already been through a few rounds, maybe, has broken in already, you're going to see marks. So if there are no marks whatsoever here, then that's a very good evidence that there is no friction there, because this is steel on steel. It's a steel from the trigger bar on steel of the frame. There should be marks, right? If there is friction there, you're going to see marks. And that's what we're seeing right here. So you can see there's a little bit of marks here, and some marks on this side as well. Nothing anywhere else. Maybe a little bit on the top here. And on the other side, it's basically clean. There's nothing there. So why I'm looking at these marks, because this is going to give me the hint of where I'm really going to benefit from polishing. If I'm polishing, for instance, this side, which has just a little bit of marks this side here, if I'm just polishing this whole thing, do that mirror finish that everybody likes to see, am I really going to add in anything to it? Am I really going to creating any benefit, improving anything here? I think the answer would be no, because there is no friction here. You're just polishing, you're just taking this coat off and just making this piece more prone to rust for no reason, because there's really nothing dragging here. Right? On this side though, you do have a little bit of dragging, so maybe you will, if you polish these areas. And that's when, like, just polish these two areas here. What could do is it's gonna, if these are the highest spots in this area, then you just polish these two areas, then you might find other higher spots in other areas that would then start dragging at that point. So the best thing to do is just kind of put in a flat sand stone or something, and just try to, do a few passes on this whole area to take all the high spots off. That's all I'm gonna do in the trigger bars. This area the rails like I talked about because of the trigger bar spring. And then there's these two areas here. There's two areas that you can see. It's hard to see in the video maybe, but there are some little marks here. This is basically the friction that it does with the disconnector. And then this ramp here rides underneath the two areas here in the frame that you can, there's a little bit of marks here. So maybe a light polish in this whole area here is gonna help a little bit too. On the top here, this is where it rides the slide. You can also benefit from some, make sure this is lightly polished as well. And this is all I'm gonna do in the trigger bar for now. The hammer strut, I don't see any marks there. It would be, maybe you wouldn't have. Actually, there is some. There's a little bit of marks. I don't know if you can see in this side, right there. Yeah, right here. So I'm gonna do a little bit of polishing in this whole area, the hammer strut and all sides here to make sure it's smooth. The disconnector, it's gonna be replaced anyway, so I'm not gonna do anything to it. As part of this, the job on this gun, we're gonna put the Pro Kit from Cajun Gun. So the disconnector, hammer, this is all gonna go on the trigger, on the sear cage or ejector. You can tell also where are the spots that you have that have faced some friction here that you can maybe work on polishing. I don't like to do that by default here. I don't like to play with the sear cage, so I'm going to do first the trigger bar and see what happens there. Maybe it already addresses everything that I'm facing there. But there is some friction here, as you can see as well. This is your disconnector. So the reason I don't do that I won't do that right now. It's because I'm going to replace the disconnector and the hammer, like I said, and it's going to change the angle and the type of friction that you have here. So polishing that before doing the change is not really a smart thing to do. And then you have some here that already comes polished, but it's kind of a rough. So you can benefit from smoothing up these areas. This is where the trigger bar rides to kind of a slide underneath the ejector when the hammer drops. And that's all we're going to do here in the sear cage. So I'm gonna start working on this, and we'll come back to show you the difference, and we're gonna reassemble and hopefully feel some difference there in the feel of the trigger. All right, so trigger bar, like I mentioned, this side first had those marks. I'm gonna go in the sandstone here and just go lightly go in the sandstone just to really remove those high spots. See how it goes. When you do that, it reveals other areas that are high as well. So like I said, if you polish those two areas, maybe others like this two would be the ones dragging after that. So it's good to kind of take a little bit off material, end to end. So I'm gonna go in a little bit on a kind of a lower grade here, and then I go to a higher grade, more of a polishing. Inner one here. All right, so this, I know this doesn't look great. It's not that mirror finish you'd like to see across the surface and all that, but like I said, removing material from where there is no friction is just causing, it's just, giving you the trouble of being prone to rust and not giving you any benefit at all. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna check this side as well, since there was a little bit of friction here. I'm gonna go and do the same thing on this side. Yeah, some high spots in that area, a couple more on the sides. Pretty standard. This is where you're gonna see more friction in this, in shadow tubes. Alright, like I said, it doesn't look very pretty, but it's as much as I'm gonna do right now, and I'll check on what happens. So these two areas here, the bumps, and this area in the back, I'm gonna use the buffer wheel. It's just better. The camera's not getting it right now, but there's, yeah, right there. I'm gonna use this wheel to polish those areas, and I'll be right back. All right, so very light polishing these areas. Like I said, the bumps are polished as well. that rides on the slide and the sides. Now last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Dremel with a buffer wheel as well on it to kind of reach out to these valleys here, these rails, and polish them up as well. Alright, now this is much smoother. Don't know if the video is going to make justice of it, but these areas are polished now. And like I said, the sides, the bumps, and the back. So I'm going to put everything back together and see the difference that we have. If these addressed, if this was enough, or if there is more friction somewhere else that I can't see. Marks inside the frame will also give you hints. I don't see anything there. That will kind of give me a hint on where we need to polish any extra area, but I'll put everything together and check again. Okay, so I got the trigger bar reassembled with the trigger shoe, the trigger return spring, and I put it back in place. I put the safety on the right side only. No detent, anything, just the safety there, because the safety will keep the trigger bar low and will keep a positive pressure tension between contact per se between the trigger bar and the trigger bar spring, and will also prevent the trigger bar to be hitting this ramp on each side of the frame. So with the safety there, the trigger bar is low enough so you can move it freely back and forth. So this is already much smoother, much better. There's less friction. I can tell there's still a little bit of friction there on the return. I can still feel a little bit of dragging, and that I'm pretty sure it's coming from the trigger bar spring and the trigger bar. So there's a lot of tension here, a lot of like the trigger bar is pushing back really hard. So what I can do here is just get something, piece of plastic, bend that little the trigger bar spring, bend a little bit on its side here, not too much. You still need to have some positive pressure there from the trigger bar pushing up so the trigger reset, and that is enough. There is nothing there. It's really smooth now, back and forth, right? I don't have the sear cage and everything assembled yet, but I can tell this is much smoother than it was before. Now I'm going to put everything back together and see, with everything there, hammer, spring, and everything, how does it feel. Let's see. Okay, I put everything back together. The hammer, sear cage, safety on the left side, everything is back. The hammer, the original hammer spring, and I can tell it's still pretty smooth. Nothing drags here. Very smooth, much smoother than it was before. Now with the tension on the spring, let me see here. Yeah, that's definitely much better than it was before. Let me put the slide so I can actually pull the trigger and tell you how it feels. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot less, still friction, but much less than it was before. And on the return, I don't feel anything. It's pretty smooth right now. So right now, if this is it, right, if I'm not changing any other parts in this gun, this is all I would have done in terms of polishing. Like I talked about the hammer strut, but it doesn't need to, because there was some marks there. Maybe those marks were already enough to polish the area that is in contact with the spring, and there's nothing else to do there, right? So why would you mess with something that is already working? If it ain't broken, don't fix, right? So how's the reset? Oh yeah, there's no, that friction that was there is all gone. Now it's just, it resets and goes down. Now, is it a lighter trigger? It feels a little lighter, but it does because of the less friction that it has in those parts that we polished. But if we put the trigger gauge here, the trigger weight gauge, it's not going to really give us maybe a couple ounces. Not really anything significant, but it is. Does it feel better? Yes, it feels much better. Right. Now what I'm going to do is I have to complete the installing and doing any fitting to the disconnector if it's needed on the Pro package, the Cajun Gun Pro package in this gun. And after I do that, I'm going to check again, and maybe there are some other areas that we need to look into, that we need to polish. Because after you install all those parts, maybe it changed some geometry, it changed some things here internally, and you have dragging parts that you didn't have before. You need to look into it. But in terms of general polishing, this is it. And if you have any dragging here and a hammer strut maybe there, and those other areas underneath the ejector that I mentioned, So I'm gonna do the full job on this, come back, and I'm going to tell you guys if there's anything else to do. So I put everything together, has the Pro Kit installed. I had to feed the disconnector a little bit to let it reset in single, which is great because it gives us the minimum pre-travel possible in single action. Double action, still like when it comes to polishing, it's still pretty smooth. There's no friction here, very smooth trigger. This with the 11.5 pound spring from Cajun gives me about 5.5 pounds in double and about 2 pound flat in single with this very short reset. And so we reset again, and then there's basically this much of pre-travel only, and hits the wall. And then this is very characteristic of CZ guns, like you hit the wall and it's not like a 1911, that hard wall that you just press and it breaks. This is like you press and then you press a little bit more and you feel it rolling. It's like the sears, there's a little bit of movement between the sear and the hammer, and then it breaks. So I'm gonna need to try, I'm gonna still work on this gun and try to minimize that a little bit. But in terms of polishing, I didn't do anything else after what I showed you, besides maybe just the hammer strut. I did polish the end of the hammer strut. The new spring did not cause any friction there, but the person who will have this gun at the end might change springs later, and then might feel some friction there. So I just decided to proactively polish the end of the hammer strut there. I did not need to polish anything on the sear cage, on the frame, or where the disconnector rides on. So this is it. In terms of polishing, that's what I would do. So I hope this is being informative to you. Thank you, and see you in the next video.